Hello and welcome. This is the Georgia Freeman and ASA atheist here to discuss the Dakota Access Pipeline and surrounding issues. Please check out my website at www.gafreeman.net. For background, check out my other videos listed below. This is a study of the Sioux People and the current DAPL project, DAPL being Dakota Access Pipeline. First, let me introduce the players. The Sioux Nation. The Standing Rock Sioux Reservation was established by the federal government through the Act of March 2nd, 1889, and is home to the federally recognized Standing Rock Sioux tribe. The Sioux are members of the Dakota and Lakota nations. The reservation has a land base of 2.3 million acres and is located on the borders of south-central North Dakota and north-central South Dakota. The local economy is based in agriculture, gaming, and the government jobs. Jobs and housing are scarce, and the economy lacks diversification, leading many talented youth to leave the reservation communities to seek work elsewhere. Additionally, few businesses in the private and agriculture sector agricultural sections are owned by Native Americans. There are several barriers to economic development to occur in the Standing Rock community. These include high dependence on government funding and jobs, brain drain as youth leave the community to seek employment, poor health, limited housing, educational attainment, transit limitations, and an economy that is lacking in diversification. Unemployment is a major issue on the reservation. Lack of housing on the reservation leading to overcrowding and population decline as individuals and families seek housing in other communities. The Standing Rock economy is highly dependent upon government employment, which makes up 60% of the jobs on the reservation and provides almost 90% of all employment compensation. Problems with water quality and inadequate supply are common throughout the reservation and have a detrimental effect on health and quality of life, as well as deterring economic growth. Widespread poverty is a major issue. Both Corson and Sioux counties are persistent poverty counties, meaning that 20% of their population has lived in poverty over the last 30 years. The struggle of the people of Standing Rock. A brief history. As the Sioux shifted from woodland to plains, the Sioux adopted a culture that centered on the horse and the buffalo. The buffalo provided the main source of food, shelter, and material items, and the horse led to the integration of warfare in the fabric of the people's lives. The object of the plains warfare was neither land acquisition nor intertribal control. Rather, it focused on raiding camps for horses and honors, and outsmarting rather than killing other tribes. This style of warfare was described by one author as comparable to a rough game of football. Both the Lakota and Dakota had complex spiritual ceremonies and placed much emphasis on family and doing things that benefit the collective people rather than the individual. These cultural and spiritual values remain important among the people to the present day. The discovery of gold in California in 1849 caused the U.S. to extend its boundaries to the Pacific Ocean, encroaching on tribal lands and threatening the buffalo herds, leading to a series of confrontations. Gold seekers traveled the Platte River Road through Lakota territory. Although generally left alone, they were frightened by intertribal raids and demanded government protection. In 1851, the federal government brought the Plains tribes together at Fort Laramie and sought to assign each a defined territory where they were to remain so settlers could continue to move across the area. Decision-making among the Sioux was based on consensus, whereby a few men could not speak for all or bind all people to treaty promises. Ultimately, many never heard or knew of the existence of the 1851 treaty, and they continued intertribal raiding. The U.S. regarded this as a breach of treaty, and in 1861, the Santee Nation, dissatisfied with the federal policies and shrinking Minnesota homeland, raided settlements and attacked a military installation, causing 40,000 settlers to flee. All tribes in the area were labeled as dangerous, and the government sent the army in to round up the hostiles. In 1863, 650 soldiers led by General Alfred Sully attacked Yanktonai at Yanktonai, I know I'm slaughtering that pronunciation, at Whitestone Hill, killing at least 300, including many women and children. In July 1864, Sully set out for the Killdeer Mountains, where Lakota and Dakota were in large hunting camps. On July 23, 1864, Sully's troops killed 100 of them in the Battle of Killdeer Mountains. The Yanktonai signed a treaty with the U.S. government in 1865, agreeing to remain at peace with the U.S. and other tribes and withdraw from overland routes through their territory. In return for these concessions, the U.S. provided monetary reparation and agricultural implements to the tribes. Continued traffic through the Sioux lands caused disruption to the people in the Buffalo Ranges in the Powder River and Bozeman Trail area. The Sioux repeatedly objected to intrusions in their territory and demanded government recognition of the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty, but the federal government never acted. With no peaceful solution in sight, the Sioux began to retaliate. The government's need for gold, coupled with demands for protection by travelers along the Bozeman Trail, increased, so the army moved in, beginning the era commonly referred to as the Plains or Sioux Wars of 1865 to 1876. The United States government proposed what became known as the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty to resolve problems with the Sioux. The treaty proposed to set aside 25 million acres of land for the Lakota and Dakota to be known as the Great Sioux Reservation, permit the Dakota and Lakota to hunt in surrounding areas until the buffalo were gone, provide for an agency, grist mill, and schools, provide land allotments to individual Sioux, and provide clothing, blankets, and food rations to be distributed to all Dakota and Lakota living on the reservation. In return, the federal government would remove all military forts in the Powder River area and prevent non-native settlement in Lakota and Dakota lands. The treaty guaranteed that any changes to this document must be approved by 3/4 of all adult Sioux males. Red Cloud signed the treaty, as did Lakota and Dakota, who lived south or east along the rivers. However, most of the Lakota living north of Bozeman Trail did not sign, including Sitting Bull, who soon became a recognized leader by refusing to give in to government pressure to live in a confined area. U.S. federal policy in the 1870s sought to enforce the reservation system. The goal of this policy was to replace the native spiritual and cultural traditions with those of mainstream American society. In 1874, the Black Hills were surveyed in violation of the 1868 treaty, and gold was discovered, leading to a rush of prospectors and protests by the Lakota and Dakota. During this time, the federal government wanted all Lakota and Dakota within the bounds of the Great Sioux Reservation and sought to establish a strong agency to enforce the reservation policy. A suitable location was found and an executive order was signed on March 16, 1875, extending the reservation's northern boundary to the Cannonball River. The agency became known as Standing Rock Agency, with Fort Yates as its military support. The agency distributed rations of food to all American Indians living on the reservation as a way to keep natives on the reservation and discourage hunting. Standing Rock Agency also distributed clothing, blankets, and cloth on an annual basis to discourage hunting with cloth replacing leather and to encourage assimilation with the white clothing standards. In December 1875, runners were sent to inform those living in unceded territory that they must report to their agencies by January 31st, or they would be considered hostile. On June 25, 1876, Custer and his troops stumbled on a large encampment at the Little Bighorn River that included many men, women, children, and elderly. Custer ordered an attack, and within 45 minutes, all men under his command were dead. During the summer and fall of 1876, those who stayed in the unceded lands were relentlessly pursued by the Army. In a tense meeting with government officials, Sitting Bull refused to surrender and stated that the Great Spirit had made him an Indian, but not an agency Indian. Rather than go to the reservation, he led his people into Canada. All natives returning to their agencies in the fall and winter of 1876 had to surrender their guns and horses to the Army. At Standing Rock, the people were forced to move closer to the administrative office so the agent and soldiers could watch them. The Sioux were confined to the reservation and regarded as prisoners of war. The Lakota and Dakota people were not willing to sign. Congress ratified the 1876 Act anyway, taking the Black Hills and extinguishing hunting rights to the unceded territory. Upon hearing of the annexation, Henry Whipple, the government-appointed chairman of the commission, said, "I know of no other instance in history where a great nation has so shamefully violated its oath." By 1877, with no horses, guns, or access to hunting grounds, the Sioux were forced into farming. Government officials instituted a system of off-reservation boarding schools which removed children from their family environments and forced total immersion in the English language and Euro-American values. All schools had the overriding goal of assimilation, imposing harsh military discipline on the children, forbidding the use of native languages and cultural expressions. Many children died of abuse, homesickness, and disease. In 1883, the government issued a set of so-called Indian offenses that strictly forbade all traditional ceremonies. These included giveaways, the sun dance, rites of purification, and social dancing, to name a few. Natives were confined to the reservation, and parents who kept their children out of school were subject to arrest and withholding of rations. In 1888 and 1889, as North and South Dakota prepared for admission to the Union, Dakotans insisted on a reduction of the Great Sioux Reservation. The federal government worked for approval of the Sioux Bill, which called for the breakup of the reservation, forfeiture of 9 million acres of land, allotment of lands to individual families, and opening of a non-allotted land to homesteading. In 1889, the people of the newly defined Standing Rock Reservation were starving and facing forced assimilation and cultural genocide. Sitting Bull opposed the government, openly stating that he and his followers would not take the land allotments when the time came, as they had not signed the Sioux Bill, and Sitting Bull was eventually killed during an arrest attempt. After Sitting Bull's death and the incident at Wounded Knee on Pine Ridge, the Standing Rock people were dispirited and under strict government control. The Dawes Allotment Act of 1887 established 160 to 320 acre farmsteads for each American Indian family. The remaining land was then opened for homesteading by non-natives, further dissolving the nation land base. Individual land ownership was intended to end communal systems in which lands were used in common with no sense of ownership, with the eventual goal of complete assimilation into the capitalism and Euro-American values. However, many Native American families continued to live in large kinship groups, speak the language, and remain traditional even after they received their allotment. Later, government policy sought to separate allotments of related families to enforce the concept of individuality. By the late 1920s, Standing Rock lands were dangerously overgrazed. A severe drought had caused widespread crop failure, livestock was wiped out, and the land was severely eroded. The once lush and bountiful lands of the plains, after 50 years of federal management, were a barren, desolate, and dusty land. The Great Depression forced some of the Standing Rock people to sell their allotments to survive, and many were again forced to accept rations or die of starvation. On July 23, 1980, the Supreme Court ruled in United States v. Sioux Nation of Indians that the Black Hills had been taken illegally and that the affected tribes were to be compensated the initial offering price plus interest, nearly $106 million. The tribes refused a settlement as they wanted the Black Hills returned to them and feel that accepting the settlement would allow the federal government to justify taking ownership of the Black Hills. At Standing Rock, the people worked to maintain their language and held to the unique qualities which define them as Dakota and Lakota, an emphasis on generosity, a spiritual attachment to the land, strength derived from extended family networks, and an identity as people with a culture that predated and survived European arrival. In 1914, the Tribal Council adopted a constitutional form of government, and even without accepting the Indian Reservation Act, this council would have more authority to make decisions on a local level. Over time, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe revised its constitution. Today, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe is governed by a tribal council elected from 8 districts on the reservation. In 1948, the Army Corps of Engineers began construction of the Oahe Dam. Despite intense opposition from the Standing Rock Sioux Tribal Council, 160,000 acres of prime agricultural and rangelands were flooded, and 25% of the reservation population was forced to move to other parts of the reservation. The impact on the reservation has been significant both in economic and psychological terms. Although the assimilation period had a great impact, the culture of the Lakota Dakota people has endured and adapted. There are certain aspects of the culture that are lost or fragmented, such as specific ceremonies, stories, and bits of language, but the basic values that the Lakota Dakota people lived by hundreds of years ago are still being taught today. The Standing Rock Sioux Tribe is a federally recognized tribe and operates under a constitution approved on April 24, 1959 by the Tribal Council of Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. Pursuant to the Constitution of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe as approved in 1959 and subsequently amended, the Tribal Council is the governing body of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. The next players are energy transfer partners, the actual pipeline builders. Energy Transfer Partners is a Texas-based company that began in 1959 as a small interstate natural gas pipeline operator and is now one of the largest and most diversified investment-grade master limited partnerships in the United States, growing from roughly 200 miles of natural gas pipeline in 2002 to approximately 71,000 miles of natural gas liquids, refined products, and crude oil pipelines today. The ETP family of partnerships remains dedicated to providing exceptional service to its customers and attractive returns to its investors. Next is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Their mission statement is to deliver vital public and military engineering services, partnering in peace and war to strengthen our nation's security, energize the economy, and reduce risk from disasters. The vision is engineering solutions for our nation's toughest challenges. If you want to contact them, you can contact the Omaha District Public Affairs Office at 402-995-2417. Now, I'm going to read a couple of emails and notices that the Corps has sent out. The first one dated November 25th, 2016. Today, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers issued a special use permit to the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe to use federal lands managed by the Corps near Lake Oahe. Omaha District Commander Colonel John W. Henderson informed Standing Rock Sioux Tribe Tribal Chairman Dave Archambault II that the tribe's spiritual gathering located south of the Cannonball River has been granted a special use permit which allows the tribe to gather to engage in a lawful free speech demonstration on federal lands designated in the permit. After coordination with the tribal leaders involved in the ongoing process of the Dakota Access Pipeline, on which some of the land is currently leased to a local rancher for grazing, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers notified the tribal leaders throughout the Missouri River Basin by letter that areas of Corps-managed federal property north of the Cannonball River will be closed to the public effective December 5th, 2016. The Army Corps of Engineers is seeking a peaceful and orderly transition to a safer location and has no plans for forcible removal, but those who choose to stay do so at their own risk as emergency, fire, medical, and law enforcement response cannot be adequately provided in these areas. Those who remain will be considered unauthorized and may be subject to citation under federal, state, or local laws. This will reduce the risk of harm to people in the encampments caused by the harsh North Dakota winter conditions. If you need to talk to anybody, you can see my blog, but you can call them at, that's Maura Kelly, 703-614-3992. And her email is moira.kelley.civ@mail.mil. Or Jessica Kershaw. She can be reached at interior_press@ios.doi.gov. Another release as of September 19th, Another release. This is Washington, D.C. Today, the Army informed the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, Energy Transfer Partners, and Dakota Access Pipeline that it has completed the review that it launched on September 9, 2016. The Army has determined that additional discussion and analysis are warranted in light of the history of the Great Sioux Nation's dispossessions of lands, the importance of Lake Oahe to the tribe, our government-to-government relationship, and the statute governing easements through government property. The Army invites the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe to engage in discussion regarding potential conditions on an easement for the pipeline crossing that would reduce the risk of a spill or rupture, hasten detection and response to any responsible spill, or otherwise enhance the protection of the Lake Oahe and the tribe's water supplies. The Army invites discussions of the risk of a spill in light of such conditions and whether to grant an easement for the pipeline to cross Lake Oahe at the proposed location. The Army continues to welcome any input that the tribe believes is relevant to the proposed pipeline crossing or the granting of an easement. Now to discuss the Sioux federal lawsuit. The DAPL is a domestic oil pipeline designed to move over 500 million gallons of crude oil across 4 states daily. The oil enters the pipeline in North Dakota, crosses South Dakota and Iowa, and winds up in Patoka, Illinois, nearly 1,200 miles later. Although the route does not actually cross the Standing Rock Reservation, it runs within a half-mile of it. A project of this magnitude often necessitates an extensive federal appraisal and permitting process. Not so here. Domestic oil pipelines, unlike natural gas pipelines, require no general approval from the federal government. In fact, DAPL needs almost no federal permitting of any kind because 99% of its total route traverses private land. Tribal allegations are: the tribe alleges that the corps violated multiple federal statutes, and in doing so, including the National Environment Policy Act, NEPA, and the National Historic Preservation Act, NHPA. In its complaint, the tribe asserts that this DAPL permitting threatens its environmental and economic well-being as well as its cultural resources. It pursues injunctive relief and says, despite this broad lawsuit, however, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe now seeks a preliminary injunction only on the alleged violations of the NHPA. The Standing Rock Sioux Tribe is a federally recognized American Indian tribe with a reservation spanning the border between North and South Dakota. The sweep of the tribe's historic and cultural connection to the Great Plains, however, extends beyond these modern reservation boundaries. A successor of the Great Sioux Nation, the tribe's ancestors once lived, loved, worshipped, and mourned wherever the buffalo roamed. These people created stone alignments, burial cairns, and other rock features throughout the area to conduct important spiritual rituals related to the rhythms of their daily life. In summer of 2014, Dakota Access crafted the route that brought DAPL to Standing Rock's doorstep. The plotted course almost exclusively tracked privately held lands in sensitive places like Lake Oahe, already existing utility lines, as only 3% of the work needed to build the pipeline would ever require federal approval of any kind, and only 1% of the pipeline was set to affect U.S. waterways. The pipeline could proceed largely on the company's timeline. Professionally licensed archaeologists conducted Class II cultural surveys, which are focused on visual reconnaissance and of the ground surface in settings with high ground visibility. In some places, however, the same archaeologists carried out more intensive Class III cultural surveys, which involve a comprehensive archaeological survey program requiring both surface visual inspection and shovel test probes of fixed grids to inventory, delineate, and assess historic sites. The company also opted to build its new pipeline along well-trodden ground wherever feasible. Around Lake Oahe, for example, the pipeline will track both the Northern Border Cass Pipeline, which was placed into service in 1982, and an existing overhead utility line. In fact, where it crosses Lake Oahe, DAPL is 100% adjacent to and within 22 to 300 feet from existing pipeline. Dakota Access chose this route because these locations had been disturbed in the past both above and below ground level, making it a brownfield crossing location. This made it less likely than that new ground disturbances would harm intact cultural or tribal features. At first cut, the Corps reviewed extensive existing cultural surveys both within and outside the Lake Oahe project area to determine whether the work might affect cultural resources. Then, on October 24th, the Corps sent a letter out to the tribes, including the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, with information about the proposed work and maps documenting the known cultural sites that the Corps had already identified. These included sites that the Corps considered to be outside the projected area of effect. In addition, the letter requested that any party interested in consulting on the matter reply within 30 days. No response was received from the tribe. The Corps did not receive responses from any other tribes, and the North Dakota SHPO, which it considered. After granting an extra 3 weeks for additional responses on December 18, the Corps made an initial determination of no historic properties affected for the soil bore testing. The Corps worked with Dakota Access to offer consulting tribes an opportunity to conduct cultural surveys at PCN locations where private landowner would permit them. This included 7 of the 11 sites in North Dakota and South Dakota. 3 tribes took the opportunity and it paid off. The Upper Sioux community identified areas of tribal concern at 3 PCN sites, and Dakota Access agreed to additional avoidance measures at all of them. At one of these sites, the tribal surveyors and the Iowa SHPO declared a site ineligible for listing on the National Registry that had not previously been identified on Dakota Access surveys. Standing Rock took a different tack. The tribe declined to participate in the surveys because of their limited scope. Instead, it urged the Corps to redefine the area of potential effect to include the entire pipeline and asserted that it would send no experts to help identify cultural resources until this occurred. In a responsive email, the Corps expressed its regret that the tribe would not participate and welcomed any knowledge or information regarding historic properties that it was still willing to provide. The Corps went on to explain that it did not regulate or oversee construction of pipelines, and its regulatory control is limited to only a small portion of the land and waterways that the pipeline traverses. In summary, the Corps has documented dozens of attempts it made to consult with the Standing Rock Sioux from the fall of 2014 through the spring of 2016 on the permitted DAPL activities. These included at least 3 site visits to the Lake Oahe crossing to assess any potential effects on historic properties and 4 meetings with Colonel Henderson. 2 days after the Corps issued the PCN authorization, Standing Rock filed a lawsuit against it under Administrative Procedure Act 5 U.S.C. Section 701, asserting in part that the Corps had violated its obligation under the NHPA prior to issuing the permitting for DAPL-related construction along the entire pipeline route. The tribe then filed on August 4, 2016, this motion for preliminary injunction to mandate a withdrawal of this permitting. At the motion hearing, Dakota Access revealed that most of the construction associated with DAPL is in fact already complete. Because only 3% of the pipeline is subject to federal permitting, Dakota Access has always been free to proceed with the vast majority of the construction, which will occur on private land. All of the necessary clearing and grading has also been done in South Dakota, and 90% of it is complete in North Dakota. One of the few exceptions of the crossing is the crossing leading to the west side of Lake Oahe, which has not yet been cleared or graded. The court conclusion. As it has previously mentioned, and this is quoting from the court, this court does not lightly countenance any depredation of lands that hold significance to the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. Aware of the indignities visited upon the tribe over the last centuries, the court scrutinizes the permitting process here with particular care. Having done so, the court must nonetheless conclude that the tribe has not demonstrated that an injunction is warranted here. The court therefore will issue a contemporaneous order denying the plaintiff's motion for a preliminary injunction. After the judge denied the Standing Rock Sioux tribe injunction against construction, the tribe appealed that ruling to the D.C. Circuit. The tribe again failed to stop the pipeline and lost. A 3-judge circuit panel in October denied the tribe's motion seeking to halt construction, ruling that it hadn't met the demanding standard for an injunction on the pipeline at the disputed site. The DOJ responded immediately and has said that it wouldn't authorize pipeline construction on the Corp's land near or under Lake Oahe in North Dakota while it decides whether it should revisit permitting decision under the National Environment Policy Act or other federal laws, and called on Energy Transfer Partners LP unit Dakota Access to put a hold on all construction within 20 miles east or west of Lake Oahe. So now we're up to date. Let's do a quick summation. 97% of the DAPL is on land considered privately owned in the eyes of the federal and state governments that are disputed by Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. 3% of the DAPL crosses federally owned territory requiring U.S. Army Corps approval. 0% crosses into current accepted Standing Rock Sioux tribal land according to the government, and the pipeline is north of the formerly accepted tribal lands. The pipeline runs parallel with other pipelines already in existence and disturbs the minimum area possible and goes over area that has already been disturbed or modified. Finally, what are these protests really about, as far as I can tell? Tribal property claims. The Standing Rock Sioux Tribe is a tribe of 8,250 individuals and claim ownership rights to the boundaries of the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty, North Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, and South Dakota. They have, in fact, won a lawsuit proving their lands were unlawfully taken. Water rights. The problems with the water quality and inadequate supply are common throughout the reservation, and this is a serious concern. They struggle with water, and any threat is considered serious. They claim, and are correct, that pipelines leak. The fear and concern is that crude will leak into the river and lake. Heartfelt resentment. The Sioux have serious grievances and do not trust the U.S. government or corporations. Broken treaties, murder, stolen lands, damming primary rivers, etc. They feel it is their lands and that this pipeline runs through tribal lands and they should have the right to negotiate the path or deny it. The tragedy of the Sioux people is due in part to hanging on desperately to the past. They come from a rich history and culture, but it is not a culture that includes progression outside of the tribe for individual utilization of one's mind to create quality, useful things. Their government and culture are focused on collectivism and the tribe. There is nothing wrong with this, except for the fact that there is no evidence of individuals working for individual roles or that anyone is achieving anything outside of the tribal group. Their largest industry is government jobs, and their government jobs come from money paid directly from the coffers of the United States government. They are living and subsisting on slave wages from the U.S. government based on the historical evils of that same U.S. government. As a pipeline is built, the Sioux do not see or look to find opportunity. They only see risk to their culture and their lives. While risk may exist, there is always opportunity, and the tragedy in my mind is the Sioux inability to see past the risk to the opportunity. Their response is to try and negate what others are doing and simply defend rather than look for positive opportunity and ways to develop growth for the tribe or individually. Check out their YouTube listed below on the meeting with the Energy Transfer LLC. They perceive negotiation as a weakness. If the company is winning, then the tribe is losing. For the tribe to win, the entire pipeline must be shut down and the company must lose. Their position is no pipeline must be built. My second concern is the tribal resistance to the government. I see this resistance as valid because they have not ceded the territory and they have not accepted any money in exchange for the land. Therefore, it is their land. We have seen that nonviolence can be effective, but showing the potential for violence can be effective as well. The Colorado Ranchers versus the BLM showed us that when serious people show up as a support to the protector and they are able to defend themselves, the government, it turns out, is not a virtual entity, but men and women who do not want to die. A show of force can and did help those ranchers. I argue that they may be making a mistake in the attempt to remain nonviolent, and it may be preferential to have armed men on their side of the fence with cameras so that if any violent actions occur, they are all being recorded and streaming. The third part of this tragedy that I see is the fact that since the Sioux see it as a win-lose proposition, there can be no negotiation for win-win. The people seem to have no interest in anything except for shutting down the entire pipeline, and this may happen, but I don't see it as a real potential. All that I see is that this position will force a win-lose scenario where someone wins and someone loses. Energy Transfer Partners is simply doing its job of working within the rules and laws that are put before it by the federal government and trying to do the best for its shareholders. The people representing the company are doing their jobs, and I don't see them as doing anything wrong with the fact that they see themselves as working within the confines of private property and defending their property and their own individual property rights. I don't believe in corporate rights, but from the perspective of working within the system and looking at the company as it exists within the current paradigm, they are just doing their job, and if they find someone trespassing on their territory or property, then they have the right to respond in that context. Safety is a real concern, and the market is driving the industry to pursue excellent pipeline safety measures. The safety performance record of the oil pipeline industry has improved over the last 14 years, and the industry is proactively trying to achieve a goal of 0 incidents. In 2014, pipelines transported over 16 billion barrels of crude oil, gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel across the nation, with more than 99.999% of those barrels reaching their destination safely. That is Six Sigma level performance with less than 3.4 errors per million. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has a perspective and believe that they have jurisdiction over all waterways. Jurisdiction meaning, for all practical purposes, they are the owners and responsible for managing and maintaining the waterways in the eyes of the government. As a voluntarist and anarchist, I have seen no evidence that they have jurisdiction beyond their claim as government with the threat of violence. However, the tribe has referenced treaties and boundaries that prove that the tribe recognizes government jurisdictional claims. I recognize that anarchists will not agree with me, but when you acknowledge at any point government legitimacy, the government will apply this everywhere as acceptance of the government's claim of validity. Finally, the tribe failed in its lawsuit because it did not build a case that the court could see. What do I mean by this? In the court of law, you have to build a case, and that means that you are not building a case for the current judge, but building a case for the appellate judges. The tribe should have done everything they could to show open and legal opposition to everything the U.S. Corps of Engineers was doing, meaning they should have showed up to the meetings and registered their opposition and claimed their own jurisdiction to the banks of the river and their claims to the land in every single dealing. Without doing this, they allowed the court to see them as accepting the jurisdiction of the government and the Corps of Engineers. I'm not arguing whether that is right or wrong. I am just stating this as a fact based on my interactions and study of the court. The court will only act on what it can see legally. For it to recognize a harm or mistake, the appellate court must see clearly those harms or mistakes on the record. By the tribe not attending any of the meetings and allowing the Corps of Engineers to register this formally, this creates a chain of evidence that the engineers were being inclusive, and the tribe, by not attending, did not set a record and failed to object properly. My goal was to soberly identify all the issues, and I hope I laid this out in a constructive way. If you truly want to help the tribe, then maybe there is a different way to consider.